In January 1947, a United States Navy photographer named David Bunger was flying a seaplane over the coast of Antarctica on a routine mapping mission. His job was to photograph the coastline, document the ice, return to the fleet. What he found instead stopped him cold. A patch of open water in Antarctica. In the middle of the Antarctic summer, when even the most optimistic conditions produce nothing but ice as far as the eye can see. Open, dark, warm water, warm enough that steam was visibly rising from the surface into the frozen air above it, surrounded on all sides by glaciers and ice walls. An oasis of liquid water in the most frozen place on Earth. He circled it. He photographed it. He landed his seaplane on it. And then he saw what was at the edges of the water, where the ice walls met the shoreline, where the glaciers had partially retreated to reveal what was underneath. His official report described dark-colored hills and what he called unusual rock formations at the water's edge. His photographs were taken. His report was filed. And within days, the entire discovery was handed to naval intelligence, and the details were quietly removed from the public record of Operation Highjump. What David Bunger actually saw at the edges of that warm water oasis has never been officially described. His photographs have never been publicly released. The location, known as Bunger Hills, exists on modern maps. You can find it. But what Bunger himself reported seeing at the edges of that location, in his own words, in his own photographs, remains in a file that has not been opened to the public in 77 years. Today we are going to talk about what he found, and why 1947 was not the first time someone found it. Part 1. What Operation Highjump actually was. Let's start with what we know for certain, because Operation Highjump is not a theory. It is documented United States military history. In August 1946, the United States Navy announced an Antarctic expedition. The scale of that expedition was unlike anything that had ever been sent to Antarctica before, or since. 13 ships, including the USS Philippine Sea, an aircraft carrier, including the USS Burton Island and USS Edisto, 2 icebreaker vessels, including submarines, destroyers, and support vessels. 33 aircraft, including 6 helicopters, 6 flying boats, and 2 seaplanes specifically designed for long-range reconnaissance. 4,700 military personnel, not scientists, military personnel, with full combat equipment, communication systems, and intelligence-gathering capabilities. The stated mission was scientific, establishing research bases, training personnel in cold weather operations, mapping the Antarctic coastline from the air. Admiral Richard Byrd, who commanded the operation, had been to Antarctica before. He was the most experienced Antarctic explorer in the United States military. He knew what scientific Antarctic expeditions looked like. They looked nothing like Operation Highjump. Scientific Antarctic expeditions used small teams, specialized researchers, minimal military presence. They took months to prepare and years to execute. Operation Highjump was planned and launched in 4 months. It was the fastest deployment of a major naval force in United States peacetime history up to that point. The kind of speed that happens when someone has decided that something needs to be found, or secured, or investigated before someone else gets there first. The Soviet Union had just emerged from the Second World War as a global superpower. The Cold War was beginning, and the United States Navy mobilized the largest Antarctic expedition in history with 4 months' notice and no scientific institution leading it. Something had been found. Something that needed an aircraft carrier to investigate it properly. And the answer to what that something was, David Bunger found part of it in January 1947, flying his seaplane over the coast of East Antarctica. Part 2. The warm water and what it means. Bunger Hills. 66 degrees south, 101 degrees east, East Antarctica. One of the most remote and inaccessible places on Earth. The oasis that Bunger found that January, open water, rising steam, dark-colored hills at the edges, has been studied at a distance by subsequent researchers. The official explanation for the warmth is geothermal activity, volcanic heat from beneath the Earth's crust warming the water and preventing it from freezing. That explanation is scientifically plausible. Antarctica sits on the most volcanically active continental crust on Earth. There are documented geothermal features across the continent. The explanation is reasonable, but here is what that explanation does not address. The dark-colored hills at the edges of the oasis, the unusual rock formations that Bunger described in his initial report, the features that were present at the boundary between the warm water and the surrounding ice. Geothermal activity produces volcanic rock, basalt, dark, rough, irregular, the kind of formations you would expect in an active volcanic area, but the formations Bunger described were not irregular. His initial report, the one that was handed to naval intelligence before the public version was filed, used specific language that subsequent researchers who had access to the original before it was redacted have described as referring to features that were regular, structured, geometric in ways that volcanic rock formations are not. The photographs he took that day would answer the question definitively. They have never been released. What produces regular, geometric, structured features at the edge of a geothermal oasis in the middle of Antarctica? What would be revealed when geothermal heat melts back the ice that has been covering a specific location for how long exactly? 200 years, 500 years, 2,000 years. Whatever was at the edges of Bunger's oasis had been covered by ice, and the ice was melting around it, slowly, steadily, revealing something at the waterline that a United States Navy photographer saw in January 1947 and was immediately prevented from discussing publicly. Part 3. The Tartarian Connection. Now we need to talk about what those structures might have been, and to do that we need to talk about what we know about Tartarian architecture. Because the connection between Tartarian construction and what has been found in Antarctica is not speculation. It is pattern recognition. Tartarian architecture, the grand institutional buildings that appear across the territory of the former Tartarian Empire, from Eastern Europe to Central Asia to the Russian Far East, shares a set of consistent features that appear regardless of location. Domes, towers, specific proportional relationships between height and width, foundation systems that go significantly deeper than the buildings above them require structurally. Those deep foundation systems are important, because in cold climates, Tartarian buildings consistently show evidence of having been designed to go underground as much as above ground. The structures that survive in Siberia, in the Ural region, in the areas of Russia where the climate most closely approximates Antarctic conditions, those structures were built with the underground component as the primary habitable space. The above-ground elements, the domes, the towers, the visible architectural features, were the functional elements. The energy receivers, the ventilation systems, the structural anchors. The primary living and working space was below ground level, insulated, protected, sustainable in extreme cold. Now, if you were a civilization that had been building underground primary structures in extreme cold climates for generations, if you had developed architecture specifically designed to function in temperatures that would kill an unprotected person within hours, and you needed to establish a settlement in the most extreme cold environment on Earth, what would you build? You would build what you already knew how to build. Deep foundations, underground primary spaces, above-ground functional towers, a design that had been refined over generations of construction in Siberia and Central Asia and the Russian Far East. A design that, if the above-ground elements were eventually covered by advancing ice, would leave exactly the kind of geometric, regular, structured features at the ice line that David Bunger described in his original, unredacted report in January 1947. Part 4. The Timeline. Let's look at the timeline, because the timing of specific events, when placed in sequence, tells a story that the official historical record does not tell. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, the Tartarian Empire, which appears clearly on maps through approximately 1780, begins disappearing from cartographic records. The territory is gradually reassigned to other political entities. The name disappears from new maps. The civilization it represented is reclassified. Between approximately 1800 and 1830, population records across the former Tartarian territory showed dramatic, unexplained collapses. Buildings that were standing in the 1790s are recorded as ruins by the 1830s, with no documented war, no documented plague, no documented natural disaster of sufficient scale to explain what the records show. In 1820, 3 separate expeditions from 3 different countries, Russian, British, and American, reach Antarctica within months of each other. Officially, they were all operating independently, with no knowledge of each other's plans. 3 major naval expeditions to the most remote place on Earth, all arriving within the same short window, all claiming to have no prior knowledge of the others. In 1823, James Weddell finds open water in the Weddell Sea at a latitude that has never been reached by surface vessels since. At the edge of that open water, he observes and notes geometric shapes he cannot explain. By 1830, the window is closed. The Weddell Sea freezes solid. The Tartarian reset is complete. The maps are redrawn. The population records show their unexplained collapses. And Antarctica, having been simultaneously discovered by 3 nations in 1820, is left officially uninhabited and largely uninvestigated for the next 100 years. In 1946, something changes. Something prompts the United States to mobilize the largest Antarctic expedition in history with 4 months' notice. Something that required an aircraft carrier and 4,700 military personnel to investigate. In January 1947, David Bunger finds the oasis, finds what is at its edges, files a report, has that report modified before public release. In February 1947, 1 month after Bunger's discovery, Operation Highjump is suddenly and unexpectedly abandoned. 8 months early, the fleet turns north. Admiral Byrd gives his famous interview warning of a hostile force capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds, and the full findings of the operation are classified. The timeline runs from the Tartarian reset directly to Operation Highjump, from the last known moment when the Tartarian civilization was intact to the first modern military expedition large enough to find what it left behind. From 1820 to 1947, 127 years of ice, and then a United States Navy photographer in a seaplane looking at something at the waterline that his superiors immediately classified. Part 5. The Towers. Now let's talk about the towers specifically, because the towers are the most specific element of the historical record that connects Tartarian architecture to what has been found and not found in Antarctica. Tartarian towers are distinctive. They are not like the towers of Gothic cathedrals or the minarets of Islamic architecture or the bell towers of Orthodox churches. They are functional structures, built to specific proportional specifications, made with specific materials, copper, iron, specific stone composites, that give them electromagnetic properties that purely decorative or religious towers do not have. These towers appear on Tartarian buildings everywhere the civilization built, from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok, from Budapest to Beijing, on government buildings, post offices, train stations, hotels, the institutional infrastructure of the civilization. And as we have discussed in previous videos, they disappeared from those buildings between 1920 and 1940, at exactly the moment when the centralized electrical grid replaced whatever system they had been part of. But here is what connects the towers specifically to Antarctica. In the geographic record of early Antarctic exploration, in the accounts of expeditions from the 1820s through the 1840s, there are repeated references to dark, vertical shapes visible at the edges of the Antarctic coastline. In several accounts, these shapes are described as columns, upright, regular, too consistent to be natural ice formations. The official interpretation of these observations is that the explorers were seeing nunataks, mountain peaks projecting above the ice sheet, and some of them certainly were seeing nunataks. But nunataks are irregular. They are eroded mountain peaks, worn by wind and ice into the rough, asymmetric shapes that natural erosion produces. They do not appear as regular columns at consistent intervals. They do not appear as vertical structures with consistent proportions. What appears at consistent intervals, with regular proportions, in vertical forms at specific heights above the surrounding surface, is towers. Towers built to a consistent design by people who had a reason to build them at consistent intervals and consistent heights. People who had been building exactly those kinds of towers across their civilization for centuries. People who, if the timeline holds, were establishing their final settlement on the most remote continent on Earth at approximately the same moment that their civilization was being erased from the maps everywhere else. Part 6. What the ice preserves here is something important that is not speculation. It is documented science, and it connects directly to the question of what might be under the Antarctic ice. The Antarctic ice sheet is the single best preservation environment on Earth. The combination of cold temperature, low humidity, and absence of biological activity means that organic and inorganic materials buried in Antarctic ice can survive essentially indefinitely without deterioration. We know this because of what has already been found in Antarctic ice. Intact bacteria, frozen for 800,000 years and successfully revived in laboratory conditions. Plant material from the last Antarctic warm period, still containing viable genetic material after millions of years. Air bubbles from 800,000 years ago, still containing intact atmospheric samples. The ice does not destroy what it covers. It preserves it, perfectly, indefinitely, which means that whatever is under the Antarctic ice, whatever was there before the ice covered it, whether it covered it gradually or rapidly, whether it covered it 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago, is still there, still intact, still in the condition it was in when the ice arrived. If there are towers under the Antarctic ice, Tartarian towers, built to the same specifications as the towers that stood on institutional buildings from Budapest to Vladivostok, built by people who were establishing a final settlement before their civilization was erased from the maps. Those towers are not ruins. They are not deteriorated. They are not collapsed. They are standing, exactly as they were built, preserved under 2 miles of ice that has kept them in perfect condition for 2 centuries. And the ice is melting. East Antarctica is losing ice mass at a documented and accelerating rate. The geothermal activity beneath Bunger Hills is ongoing. The oasis that Bunger found in 1947 is larger now than it was then. The ice that sealed whatever Bunger saw at the waterline in 1947 is retreating, slowly, but measurably. And whatever is at the edges of that warm water oasis in East Antarctica is closer to the surface today than it has been at any point since the Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959. Part 7. Why 1947 matters. Let's come back to 1947 one final time, because the year itself is significant in a way that the official historical record makes difficult to see, but impossible to unsee once you notice it. 1947 was the year that the modern era of unexplained aerial phenomena began. In June 1947, 4 months after Operation Highjump was abandoned, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing objects flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state, at speeds he calculated to be far beyond anything in the known aviation inventory of any nation. His report was the beginning of the modern era of documented, officially acknowledged, unexplained aerial sightings. In July 1947, 5 months after Highjump, the incident near Roswell, New Mexico, produced the first official United States government acknowledgement, later retracted, of a recovered craft of unknown origin. And Admiral Byrd, in his February 1947 interview, had warned specifically of a force capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds, from Antarctica to the Arctic. In minutes, not hours, minutes, We are not connecting these events as a definitive chain of causation. We are noting that they occurred within months of each other, that the largest military expedition ever sent to Antarctica was abandoned in the same month that its photographer found an inexplicable warm water oasis with structured features at its edges, and that the months immediately following that abandonment produced the first major wave of documented, officially acknowledged, unexplained aerial activity in modern history. Something was found in Antarctica in January 1947, something that prompted the immediate abandonment of a 4,000-person military operation. Something that prompted a warning from the most experienced Antarctic explorer in American military history about a force that operated from the polar regions at speeds that no known technology could match. What David Bunger saw at the waterline of that warm water oasis, what was in those photographs that were immediately handed to naval intelligence, we cannot tell you with certainty. The photographs have not been released. The original report has not been declassified, but we can tell you what the evidence points toward, what the architectural record of the Tartarian civilization points toward, what the timing of the Tartarian reset points toward, what the accounts of early Antarctic explorers point toward, what the pattern of classified findings and coordinated silence points toward. Towers, standing at the edges of warm water in East Antarctica, built to specifications that match Tartarian construction techniques precisely, preserved under ice for 2 centuries, and found in January 1947 by a United States Navy photographer who was immediately prevented from saying what he had seen. We started this video with David Bunger, a photographer, a Navy man doing his job, flying his seaplane over the coast of East Antarctica because someone needed the coastline mapped and he was the one assigned to do it. He was not looking for anything. He was not on a mission to find hidden civilizations or lost cities or architectural anomalies under the ice. He was doing his job. And his job took him over a patch of open water in the most frozen place on Earth, where the ice had retreated enough to reveal what was at the shoreline beneath it. And what was at the shoreline changed everything about what Operation Highjump was doing in Antarctica, changed it enough to end the operation 8 months early, changed it enough to prompt a warning that has never been officially explained, changed it enough to keep his photographs in a classified file for 77 years. The Tartarian civilization built towers. They built them everywhere they settled. They built them in Siberia and Central Asia and Eastern Europe and the Russian Far East. They built them in conditions that would have been considered impossible by every other civilization of their era. And when their civilization was erased from the maps, the towers on their buildings were removed, piece by piece, city by city, between 1920 and 1940. But not all of them. The ones that were built before the ice came, the ones that were sealed under 2 miles of Antarctic ice, at the same moment the maps were being redrawn and the population records were showing their unexplained collapses. Those towers were not removed. They could not be removed. The ice had them. And in January 1947, a warm water oasis in East Antarctica had melted back just far enough to show what the ice had been keeping. David Bunger saw it. His photographs show it. And 77 years later, those photographs remain in a file that has not been opened. The towers are still there. The ice that preserved them is retreating. And the question of what David Bunger saw at the waterline of that impossible warm water oasis in 1947 is still waiting for an answer that the official record has consistently refused to provide. We are not telling you what to believe. We are showing you what is there, and asking the questions that the evidence demands. Subscribe, because the ice is melting. And what it is revealing, structure by structure, tower by tower, at the edges of warm water in the most restricted place on Earth, is becoming harder to explain away with every passing year. The towers are there. They have been there since before the ice came. And they are waiting.